All right, we are back in Mark chapter 15 again tonight. And I would like to title this, Yeshua's Silence Spoke Volumes. And you'll see what I'm talking about as we read through this. We're in Mark 15, and we're going to start in verse 4, and we're going to pick up as he has already been arrested. He was already brought before Caiaphas. Now he stands before Pilate. And another thing we're going to look at is the truth about Pontius Pilate, and not the way Hollywood and others try to portray him. All right, verse 4 in Mark 15. And Pilate asked him again, saying, Answerest thou nothing? Behold, how many things they witness against thee. But Jesus yet answered nothing, so that Pilate marveled. Now at that feast he released unto them one prisoner, whomsoever they desired. And there was one named Barabbas, which lay bound with him, that had made insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection. And the multitude, crying aloud, began to desire him to do as he had ever done unto them. But Pilate answered them, saying, Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for envy. But the chief priests moved the people that he should rather release Barabbas unto them. And Pilate answered and said again unto them, What will ye then that I shall do unto him whom ye call the King of the Jews? And they cried out again, Crucify him. Then Pilate said unto them, Why, what evil hath he done? And they cried out the more exceedingly, Crucify him. And so Pilate, willing to content the people, released Barabbas unto them, and delivered Jesus, when he had scourged him, to be crucified. Okay. There are some religious traditions that claim that the Roman procurator, Pontius Pilate, was wanting to do the right thing, and he didn't want to kill Jesus because he believed in him, and Pilate was just a man of heart. Well, let me unpaint that picture for you. Up until this point, Pontius Pilate had murdered thousands of people, including children and women. Pilate was a monster. Now, it says here, as he's questioning Yeshua, he's asking him, well, why aren't you saying anything? Do you hear all these reports against you? Say something. Defend yourself. Was he really interested in Jesus' innocence? No. As a matter of fact, when he's saying, well, what do you want me to do with your King of the Jews? Who ruled Israel at that time? The Romans. The Roman Empire ruled it. So did they have a Jewish king? In the political and physical sense, no. Did they have a king that was Jewish among them? Absolutely. Now, when Pilate is saying, what do you want me to do with your King of the Jews? Was he really being sincere? This is the honored king? No. And we're going to see that as we get further along in the gospel. So, it talks about at this particular feast. What particular feast is this?
Passover.
Passover. This is Passover. Apparently there was a custom during Passover that Pilate would allow a prisoner to go, kind of his charity thing. So the choice was between an insurrectionist who was also a murderer, and Yeshu'a. And who did the people prefer that they release? Barabbas. Barabbas. Was that because they felt Barabbas would just be safer in society than Yeshu'a? No. Ultimately, why did they want the Lord killed? Because they considered him an insurrectionist. Wherever he was going and teaching, does it say it was just a few people? No, it says they had multitudes. How many times do you see the phrase multitude in the gospel? Almost on every account where he's speaking. People at this time are expecting the Messiah. They're expecting the Messiah. They see Yeshu'a. Now, did everyone accept him as the Messiah? No. But apparently, multitudes wherever he went knew he was the Messiah. Otherwise, he would not have had the effect that he had. How come there were many that doubted? Well, because the scriptures in the Old Testament tell you that when the Messiah comes, he's going to be a conqueror like King David was. He's going to be from the line of David, and he's going to come and conquer, and he's going to prevail Jerusalem over the rest of the world. Is that true that that's going to happen? Yes. Not at that time. See, the Old Testament passages also tell us that there's two different time periods that the Messiah is going to come. And the first time that the Messiah comes, he's not going to be a great warrior of the line of David. He's going to be a man that people are going to despise. Now, multitudes didn't despise him, but the religious leadership despised him. Now, is it possible that the religious leadership wanted him dead at all costs because the religious leadership knew that he was the Messiah and knew that when the Messiah came, their reign was over. Their time of power is over. Now, Pilate is asking the Lord, why aren't you answering things? Listen to all the things they're accusing you of. Out of all the accusations made, was there anything legitimate? No. What was he guilty of? He wasn't guilty of anything. So why is the religious leadership adamant about him dying? And as we just talked about a second ago, a possibility that the Messiah came and they want to get rid of him. Take a look at verse 10. Verse 10 tells you why the religious leadership delivered him. And let's see if there's a crime there. For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for a crime or for an emotion, a feeling. It says for envy. Why were they envious of him? Is it possible that all those people that the religious leadership were leading and had them coming into their synagogues and were making incredible amounts of money on them from taxes, temple tax? Well, if all the people realized that the Messiah had come, then what point is there for there to be a religious leadership? There's no point for them anymore. So, they couldn't formulate an official charge against him, as we read in 14. He wasn't guilty of any crime, so why did they deliver him? They were envious. Tells you right there. If someone is envious of someone else, does that make someone Guilty of a crime? No. Which brings us to God-fearing, merciful, loving Pontius Pilate. Who was ultimately in charge and ruled over Jerusalem at this time? Pilate. Pilate was in charge. Did Pilate not tell the Lord, hey, I've got the power to basically do whatever I want with you. I could release you or I could have you killed. Did he not tell him that? Pilate was appointed by Caesar as the ruler over Jerusalem. So, if loving Pilate, as he's going, well, what is he guilty of? I don't see where he broke the law. If he really did this out of love, and he believed Jesus was absolutely innocent and didn't want to harm him because Pilate believed in him, well then why didn't Pilate tell the religious authorities that were present at the releasing of Barabbas, you know what? I don't see any fault in him. I'm releasing him. That's how it's going to be, and you're just going to shut up and like it. Just the way the Romans have always been ruling. He didn't do that, did he? He believed in Jesus so much and believed his innocence so much that verse 15, he had him beaten almost to death. Does it say he turned him back over to the Jewish religious authorities, and the religious authorities scourged him almost to death? Who did he turn him over to? His own Roman soldiers. Did they just smack him around a little bit and let him go? They beat him within an inch of his life. That's how merciful and loving Pontius Pilate was. The fact is, Pilate was a ruthless, brutal ruler who ruled by fear and intimidation. There are people that say, well, Pilate was afraid of the people. Yeah, really? The Romans had been ruling for a couple centuries right now. I don't think any of the Roman leaders were afraid of anyone. Do you? Let's take a look at history. The Romans ruled with a rod of iron. Why was Barabbas put in jail in the first place? He was an insurrectionist. What does that mean? He was fighting against the Roman system, and they weren't going to have it, and they arrested him. There's actually a religious sect that holds a holiday celebration to Pontius Pilate, and they think they're part of Christianity. Yes, let's honor the man who beat the Lord within an inch of his life. Let's honor him. But in reality, there is a denomination out there that holds a special day to honor Pilate. I'm sorry, I wish I was making that up. I'm not. And why do you end up with unbiblical nonsense like that? Because people refuse to acknowledge the history of Scripture. It is documented, not only by Josephus, but by others during the first century. Pilate was a ruthless murderer. He had crucified thousands of people, sometimes for things as simple as sneezing in his presence. He wanted to let the Lord go. He believed the Lord was innocent. Then why did he beat him within an inch of his life and have him killed in the most brutal fashion? Is that what you do when a person's innocent and you have the power to release them? The gospel tells you the kind of character Pilate was. He was a murderer and a ruthless, brutal dictator who ruled by fear and intimidation, because that's how the Romans ruled. Yes, they permitted the territories that they conquered for those indigenous people to practice their own religion, because it makes ruling for the Romans a little bit easier. But when it came down to it, when Caesar said, this is how it's going to be, you better darn well believe that's how it was going to be, or lives were going to be lost. And that's how Pilate ruled. Jesus' preaching was what? The Old Testament scriptures. The Old Testament scriptures center around a core theme. The core theme is, there is the Lord thy God, there is no other God, he is the supreme authority. So if you have the Lord himself preaching that message and the people are believing it, are they going to pay that kind of homage to the Romans anymore? Or to the religious leaders anymore? No. So guess what? They killed him to silence him, to squash a movement that had been foretold centuries before it ever happened. And as we continue on in Mark's Gospel, we are going to see just how loving and how believing those innocent Romans and Pilate was. And you're going to see that's not the case. So the Lord willing, we will pick up in verse 16 next week. And Shabbat Shalom, and God bless.